You know how some political terms get thrown around so much they start to feel familiar, but if you really stop to think about them, well, their real meaning can be a little fuzzy. Zionism is a perfect example of that. So today, we're going to unpack where this really powerful and, let's be honest, controversial idea actually came from.
To get to the bottom of Zionism, we have to go way, way back. The word Zion itself isn't modern at all. It's ancient. It's biblical. Originally, it was a real place, a fortress that basically became another name for the city of Jerusalem. For thousands of years, Zion has been this idea of a promised homeland, something incredibly central and deeply spiritual to Jewish identity.
And that brings us to the big question, the real mystery we're looking at here. If this dream of returning to Zion is millennia old, why did a political movement to make it happen suddenly catch fire in the 1880s? What changed in the world to turn an ancient prayer into a modern political project?
To answer that, first we need to understand this massive political earthquake that was literally reshaping the entire world. The very idea of what a country was changing, and that shift, well, that's the key to understanding why Zionism was born when it was.
So before the late 1700s, the world was mostly these huge, sprawling, patchwork empires. You might be a German-speaking subject of an Austrian emperor living right next to a town of Slavic speakers, and your main loyalty? It was probably to your local lord, or maybe the emperor himself. But then, after the revolutions in America, and especially in France, a whole new idea grabs hold: the nation-state. This new model says a country should be made of one people, with one culture, one language, all united by a single national identity. You're not a subject anymore, you're a citizen of France.
Well, this New World Order created a pretty profound crisis for one group in particular, the Jews of Europe. They were a minority everywhere. In a world that was busy sorting itself into these neat, homogeneous national boxes, where exactly did a people without a nation of their own fit in? This problem became known all across Europe as the Jewish question.
So, in response to this pressure, three main ideas emerged inside Jewish communities. The traditionalists said, look, the return to Zion is God's business. We have to wait for the Messiah. The reformers argued it was time to update Judaism, treat it more like a moral compass, and let go of the whole idea of a physical return. But the most popular hope, especially in Western Europe, was assimilation, become German or French or Polish in public, and stay Jewish at home in private.
But that hope of just blending in, it slammed headfirst into a new and way more sinister kind of hatred. For centuries, prejudice against Jews was mostly religious. Now, it was awful, but it was conditional. In theory, you could escape it by converting to Christianity. This new anti-Semitism of the 19th century was totally different. It was racial. It said that being Jewish wasn't about your beliefs, it was a biological trait, something in your blood, and you can't convert your way out of your race.
This quote from the famous composer Richard Wagner just perfectly captures the deep contradiction that was going on in European society. Intellectually, liberals supported equality for everybody, but on a social, kind of gut level, this deep-seated repulsion was still there. They supported Jewish freedom in theory, but not actual Jews in practice. Now, while these tensions were simmering all across Europe, in the Russian Empire, they absolutely exploded. A single event there would shatter the dream of assimilation for millions and directly spark the birth of the Zionist movement. You have to understand the scale of this. Around 1880, roughly half of all the Jews in the entire world lived inside the Russian Empire. They were a massive and very obvious minority, often forced by law to live in specific areas, which made them both highly visible and incredibly vulnerable.
The whole situation was a powder keg, and in 1881, someone lit the fuse. Tsar Alexander II was assassinated, and it turned out one of the conspirators was Jewish. That single fact was all it took. It was seized upon to ignite a national fury, unleashing this brutal 2-year wave of anti-Jewish mob violence, or pogroms, on a scale nobody had ever seen before.
This first-hand account from that time, it just captures the absolute terror. We are virtually under siege. What does the future have in store for us? Will they have mercy on the youngsters who don't even know yet that they are Jews, that they are wretches? For so many people, the pogroms were the final, horrifying proof that it didn't matter what they did. It didn't matter how much they tried to assimilate. They would never, ever be safe in Europe.
And out of that trauma, that violence, a really radical new idea began to take shape. In the face of failed assimilation and murderous hatred, a few thinkers started to propose a solution that, until then, would have seemed completely unthinkable: It was a modern answer to a very modern crisis.
One of the first was a Russian doctor, a guy named Leo Pinsker. He had been a huge believer in assimilation, but the pogroms just completely shattered his worldview. In this pamphlet he wrote in 1882, Auto-Emancipation, he basically argued that Jews had to stop waiting for other people to save them. The only way to be safe, he said, was for Jews to emancipate themselves by becoming their own nation.
But listen closely to what he wrote here. Pinsker's initial idea was what we'd call territorialist. He's arguing that the first priority isn't about going back to the ancient biblical homeland. It's just about securing a territory, any territory, where Jews could be safe and could govern themselves. The goal was survival, not necessarily sentiment.
Okay, so while Pinsker's ideas are spreading in Russia, another assimilationist is about to have his own wake-up call, this time in the West. Theodor Herzl was a journalist in Vienna, and he was covering a famous trial over in Paris, the Dreyfus Affair, where a Jewish army captain was falsely accused of being a traitor. And the case just unleashed this tidal wave of anti-Semitism. In France, of all places, the supposed heart of the European Enlightenment.
For Herzl, that was it. That was the last straw. He figured if Jews couldn't be safe in France, they couldn't be safe anywhere in Europe. In his huge landmark pamphlet from 1896, The Jewish State, he just lays it all out, arguing that the only logical solution to this never-ending anti-Semitism was for Jews to have their own state. And his work, it energized and mobilized people like nothing before it.
And so, the idea started to become action. Inspired by these new thinkers and fleeing persecution, small groups of really idealistic Jews, mostly from Eastern Europe, began to immigrate to the land their ancestors had called Zion, which, at the time, was a multi-ethnic province inside the huge Ottoman Empire.
Now, it is absolutely crucial to understand the demographic reality on the ground back then. Palestine was not an empty land. The population was overwhelmingly Arab, both Muslim and Christian, with a very small pre-existing Jewish minority that had been living there for centuries. They were all subjects of the Ottoman Sultan.
This first wave of immigration, it's known as the first Aliyah, and it was small but incredibly determined. Groups with names like the Lovers of Zion organized it all. Their goal was deeply symbolic, to literally return to the soil, buying land from often absentee landlords and setting up new farms and villages. This started to lay the physical groundwork for a future national home, but yeah, it also started creating new tensions within that complex Ottoman society.
And this poem, written right around that time and later became Israel's national anthem, it just beautifully captures the whole spirit of the movement. It connects this modern, desperate political project that was born in 19th century Europe directly back to that ancient 2,000-year-old dream of returning to the land of their ancestors.
So there you have it. In the crucible of European nationalism and anti-Semitism, a new movement was forged. It answered the so-called Jewish question with a radical idea: self-emancipation through statehood, back in the ancient homeland. The first steps had been taken, but the ultimate question remained: could this new national dream actually become a reality on this ancient and already inhabited land?